The Silent Neighbor. It was a cloudy afternoon when I first moved into the apartment building. The air carried that damp, heavy smell of rain-soaked concrete, and the hallways echoed with the faint hum of old fluorescent lights. The building wasn't in the worst part of town, but it wasn't exactly a place you'd brag about living in either. The walls were painted in this faded beige, chipped and peeling in places, with water stains shaped like shadows that seemed to creep lower each day. I told myself it was temporary, just a stepping stone before I could afford something better. The rent was cheap, the landlord didn't ask too many questions, and I needed somewhere fast. Still, there was something about the place that made me feel uneasy the moment I dragged my first box across the cracked linoleum floor. My unit was 3B, right across from 3A. The hallway between us was narrow, so narrow that if both doors opened at the same time, they would nearly touch. I noticed right away that 3A's door was different from the rest. While all the other doors were plain wood-painted brown, this one was darker, heavier, like it belonged in a different building entirely. It had no peephole, no decoration, not even a nameplate. Just a black, unblinking surface with a tarnished brass number screwed into it, 3A. The landlord had mentioned nothing about my neighbor. No introductions, no warnings. And yet, even as I hauled in my boxes, I felt like someone was watching me from behind that door. Over the first week, I tried to settle in. The place was old, but manageable. Pipes groaned at night. The elevator shuddered and wheezed like it was carrying ghosts, and the walls were thin enough to hear muffled TV static and the occasional argument from down the hall. But from 3A, nothing. Not a single sound. No footsteps, no voices, no television, no clinking of dishes, no doors opening or closing. Just silence. A heavy, unnatural silence that pressed against my ears whenever I stopped to listen. I figured maybe they worked nights. Maybe they were just quiet people. Maybe it was empty altogether. But then I began to notice small details that didn't fit. Sometimes, late at night, when I'd come back from a shift at the diner, I'd see the faintest sliver of light bleeding out from under their door. A thin white line that disappeared if I looked at it too long, as if whoever was inside had noticed me noticing. Other times, when I passed by, I could swear I smelled something faint, like old dust mixed with something sour, metallic, almost like blood left out too long. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of knocking. Not on my door, but on theirs. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I lay frozen in bed, holding my breath, waiting for the sound of their door opening. But it never came. After a long silence, I crept to my peephole. The hallway was empty, except for that door, blacker than the shadows around it. The next morning, curiosity gnawed at me. I knocked on 3A myself, just once, lightly, as I passed by. No answer. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence, so thick it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. A week later, something strange happened. I was carrying groceries up the stairs, since the elevator had finally broken for good, when I dropped one of the bags. A can rolled across the landing and bumped softly against the base of 3A's door. The sound was small, but enough to make me pause. That was when I noticed something I hadn't before. The door wasn't flush with the frame. There was a tiny gap, no more than the width of a coin, running along the bottom. And from that gap, air was seeping out. Not a draft from the hallway vent, but something colder, heavier, almost damp. Instinct told me to move, to grab the can and leave, but instead I crouched, squinting at the slit of darkness beneath the door. For the briefest second, I thought I saw something move on the other side. A pale flash, like skin pulling back out of sight. I stumbled to my feet, heart pounding, and rushed back to my own apartment. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the door before I went to sleep. The next morning, something was slipped under my mat. It was a piece of paper, yellowed and brittle, as though it had been sitting in a drawer for decades. On it, in spidery handwriting, was a single sentence: "Do not knock on 3A again." I stood there in the hallway, holding that piece of paper like it might bite me. My first thought was that it had to be a prank. Maybe some other tenant had slipped it under my mat as a joke. But then I noticed something unsettling. There were no footprints in the thin layer of dust that gathered along the hall floor. No sign of anyone having walked up to my door during the night. I bent down and examined the note again. The paper felt old, fragile, like it might crumble if I pressed too hard. The handwriting wasn't the kind you saw anymore either. The letters were long and spidery, curling at odd angles, as if whoever wrote it hadn't held a pen in years. The ink looked faded, but the words themselves were sharp enough to sting. "Do not knock on 3A again." I crumpled it in my fist and tossed it into the trash, but all day at work I couldn't stop thinking about it. The image of that pale flash I thought I'd seen under the door replayed in my head, over and over. Was there really someone in there, watching me? That night, I tried to ignore the feeling. I made dinner, put on the TV, and tried to convince myself it was all just paranoia. But around midnight, the silence from 3A started to feel louder than anything else in the building. It was like every creak, every drip of the pipes, every muffled laugh from another floor. All of it just highlighted the fact that behind that black door, there was absolutely nothing. I decided to test it. I turned off my lights and sat in the dark, watching the gap at the bottom of 3A's door from my peephole. Minutes dragged by. My eyes started to ache, my legs went numb, and just when I was about to give up, I saw it. Light. A soft glow, faint and flickering, like a candle seeping out from the gap. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. The glow faded. But then something else happened. A shadow moved across the light, a shape that bent and shifted, too tall and thin to be human. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stepped back from the door and held my breath, straining to hear. That's when I heard it for the first time. A whisper, so faint I thought it was just my mind playing tricks. But no, it was real. It seeped through the wood in broken syllables, like someone speaking from underwater. I couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm, the low hiss, the unnatural pauses. I backed away slowly, refusing to take my eyes off my own door, as though the sound could bleed through mine as easily as it did theirs. When I finally crawled into bed, I pulled the blankets up over my head like a child, trying to muffle the whispers that seemed to echo in my skull long after they'd stopped. The next morning, I told myself I was done. No more watching, no more notes, no more obsessing. If 3A wanted to stay silent, let them. It wasn't my problem. But the building didn't agree. Over the next few days, I started noticing changes. The temperature in the hallway dropped whenever I passed 3A. My breath would fog in the air even when the rest of the building was warm. Sometimes, I'd catch tenants pausing by the door, staring for a moment too long, then hurrying away like they didn't realize they'd stopped. Once, I overheard an older woman from 4C talking to her friend on the stairs. "He still lives there, you know," she whispered. "Don't say that," her friend replied quickly. "You'll draw its attention." They noticed me listening and went silent, giving me sharp, warning looks before disappearing down the stairwell. That night, I dreamed of the door. I was standing in the hallway, but everything was wrong. The walls were breathing, swelling in and out like lungs. The floor pulsed under my feet, sticky and wet. And 3's door, it was open. Inside was nothing but blackness. Not the kind of darkness you get from a room with no lights, but a complete void, swallowing everything. I tried to back away, but something reached out of it. Long, pale arms stretching into the hall, fingers bending at impossible angles. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The dream would have been bad enough, but then I saw something on my floor. Right by the dresser I had pushed against the door weeks ago. A handprint. Not in dirt, not in dust, but in something darker. Redder. Stained into the linoleum like it had been pressed there, waiting for me to wake up. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, the handprint was gone. I tried to tell myself the handprint had been part of the dream. Just a trick of the mind carrying into waking. But that explanation didn't stick. It hadn't looked like a normal handprint. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow, the shape too unnatural. Still, when I dragged myself out of bed that morning, I searched the floor again and again. Nothing. The linoleum was clean, as if nothing had ever touched it. That was the worst part. The disappearing. Whatever was happening with 3A, it wasn't content to stay behind that door anymore. It was seeping into my space, leaving marks only I was meant to see. I considered calling the landlord, but what would I even say? "Hey, the neighbor I've never seen left a ghostly handprint in my apartment." They'd think I was crazy, or worse, drunk. So I kept quiet, but I couldn't ignore it. Every time I passed by 3A now, I felt something watching me. Not just the vague paranoia of being stared at, but the sharp, needling certainty of eyes pressing into my skin. The air seemed to bend around that door, heavy and wrong, pulling my attention even when I tried to look straight ahead. On the 5th night after the dream, I heard something new. It started as a dragging sound. Soft at first, like cloth being pulled across the floor. Then louder, heavier, a wet scrape that echoed through the hall. I pressed my ear to my door, holding my breath. The sound was coming from 3A. It lasted for almost 10 minutes. Something being dragged across the floor, back and forth, as though the room was endless and the weight inside it unbearable. Then silence. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. I stopped one of the other tenants on the stairs, a man in his 50s with sunken eyes and a permanent scowl. I asked him, casually, if he knew who lived in 3A. He froze halfway up the steps. His hand tightened on the railing until his knuckles went white. Then, without a word, he turned and went back down, nearly stumbling in his hurry. The message was clear, don't ask. But I couldn't let it go. The silence was worse than any answer. That evening, I did something stupid. I slid a note under 3's door. It wasn't much. Just a scrap of paper with 4 words scrawled in pen. "Do you live here?" I don't know what I expected. Maybe no response at all. Maybe something cruel. But what I got was far worse. When I left my apartment the next morning, my note was back under my mat, folded neatly, the paper crisp and cold as though it had been kept in a freezer. And underneath my question, in the same spidery handwriting as before, was a single word: yes. My stomach dropped. I shoved the paper into my pocket and tried to breathe, but the hallway seemed to close in around me. The silence behind 3A felt thicker, heavier, like whoever was inside knew exactly what I was doing, what I was thinking. That night, the dragging returned. But this time, it was accompanied by something else. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not on my door. On the inside of 3S. I froze, heart hammering, as the knocks repeated, steady and patient. Then came the whispering, louder than before, almost words this time. I pressed my pillow over my head, but it didn't block them out. And then, silence. For a moment, I thought it was over, until I heard it. A single knock on my door. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My eyes burned from not blinking. The knock didn't come again. I sat there, rigid in bed, until dawn crept through the blinds. Only then did I finally gather the courage to move. I crept to the door, pressed my eye to the peephole, and saw nothing. Just the empty hallway. But when I looked down, I saw another slip of paper waiting beneath my mat. I bent to pick it up, my hands shaking so badly I almost tore it. This time, it said, "Stop listening." I almost didn't pick the paper up. My whole body screamed to leave it there, to step over it like trash and never look back. But curiosity always wins, doesn't it? That single sentence, "Stop listening," burned into my mind the moment my eyes touched it. I locked myself inside, pacing back and forth, clutching the note in my hand. Whoever, or whatever, was in 3A knew exactly what I was doing. It wasn't random anymore. It wasn't just silence and whispers leaking out from behind that door. It was directed at me. For the first time, I thought about moving, just packing up and leaving this cracked, decaying building behind. But I knew I couldn't afford it. Not yet. And the deeper truth? A part of me didn't want to leave, because something in that silence had its hooks in me. Over the next few days, things only got worse. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway at night. Not the ordinary shuffle of tenants coming and going, but slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside my door. They never knocked, never rattled the handle, just stood there, long enough for the air to grow colder, for the hair on the back of my neck to rise. Then they'd move again, back into 3A. Sometimes, I'd wake to the sound of breathing. Not mine, not even human. Too steady, too hollow. It came from the walls, the ceiling, sometimes directly under my bed. And then there were the whispers. By now, they were constant. I'd hear them while brushing my teeth, while cooking, while trying to drown them out with the TV turned up loud. Always low, broken syllables, always coming from the same direction. From 3A. One night, I finally snapped. I stormed out into the hallway at 2 in the morning and slammed my fist against their door. "I know you're in there," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Stop it. Just stop." The silence that followed was worse than any sound. The air seemed to press down on me, heavy and wet, like the whole building was holding its breath. Then, from the other side of the door, something tapped back. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. I stumbled backward, my anger dissolving into pure fear. I turned to run back inside my apartment and froze. There was a figure at the end of the hallway. Tall, too tall, Its head brushed the ceiling, its limbs impossibly long, bent at wrong angles like a puppet with broken strings. Its face, or where its face should have been, was nothing but a pale blur. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just stood there, watching me. I blinked and it was gone. I locked myself inside, shoved the dresser back against the door, and stayed awake until morning, clutching a kitchen knife I knew wouldn't help if that thing decided to come in. But daylight brought no comfort, because when I checked my peephole that morning, there was something waiting for me. Not another note, not another whisper. A single photograph tucked carefully under my mat. It was a picture of me, standing in the hallway the night before, my fist raised, pounding on Threa's door, and behind me, barely visible in the shadows at the far end of the hall, that figure. I dropped the photo as if it had burned my fingers. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't even pick it up again. The hallway outside my door seemed to stretch further than it should, shadows pooling in every corner like liquid darkness. I didn't know whether to call the police, the landlord, or just run as far as I could. But something told me that wouldn't matter. Not anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, knife in hand, eyes glued to the black rectangle of Threa's door. Every small noise made me flinch. The pipes groaning, the elevator creaking, the faint scraping of shoes on linoleum. I wanted to leave, I wanted to escape, but I also wanted to know, to see. Around 2:17 a.m., I heard it, the dragging sound, heavy, deliberate, like something large being pulled across the floor. Only now it was different. The rhythm was uneven, jagged, like it was learning the space, testing it. And beneath it, whispers, distinct this time, clearer, words, almost complete. You shouldn't have seen. You shouldn't have moved. I froze. The words echoed in my skull, louder than anything in the hall. And then the knocking started. Fast, erratic, not 3 slow taps, but a staccato beat, as if the door itself was pounding to the rhythm of my heartbeat. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. I could only watch, paralyzed, as the door began to shiver. Not like a normal door, but like it had a pulse of its own. The wood warped, bending inward and outward, creating a rhythm I couldn't understand. Then it stopped. Silence. A single, small sound came next, something sliding beneath my door. My eyes followed the movement, heart hammering. It was another note. I picked it up with shaking hands. The handwriting was sharper this time, almost angry. Don't turn around. I froze, staring at the note. The message was simple, clear, impossible to ignore. And then I heard it. A slow, deliberate step. Behind me. I didn't dare turn. I couldn't. My body was rigid, every muscle locked in place. The step came again, closer, and then another, until it was right behind my bed. My heart felt like it would burst. I felt the air shift, cold and damp, brushing my neck. Something breathed there, hot, foul, heavy, and then a whisper right next to my ear. You should have stayed silent. I bolted upright, swinging the knife blindly. My apartment was empty. Nothing moved. Nothing stood there. Yet I felt it. The presence, oppressive and patient, still lingering. My phone lay on the table. I grabbed it, ready to call anyone, but the screen lit up with a single message. I am here. Always. That was when I understood. 3A wasn't just a neighbor. 3A was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the floor, in the shadows that stretched further than the hall could contain. It watched, it waited, and it was patient. By the next day, I couldn't stay. I packed what I could carry, leaving everything else behind, and moved out in the dead of morning, heart pounding with every step down the stairs. I didn't look back, but I could feel it following me, stretching out through the halls of that building. Weeks later, I returned only once. The building was empty, abandoned, silent as a grave. I walked past 3A, peering at the black door. Nothing, just the heavy, unnatural silence that had haunted me for so long. And yet I knew it hadn't left. It never would. I moved across the city, changed apartments, changed jobs, changed routines. But sometimes, when the hallway is too quiet or the shadows too long, I hear it. The faint scraping of shoes, the dragging of something heavy, the whispers that slice through the silence. Always watching, always here. Even now, I wonder if I ever stop moving, if I ever stop listening, will it finally be satisfied? Or will it find me wherever I hide? And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can hear a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. By the time I moved again, I thought I had escaped. I rented a small studio on the other side of the city, cheap, tucked away in a side street. No hallway neighbors, no old peeling walls, no black doors. I told myself the nightmare was over. But nightmares don't end so easily. The first night in the new apartment, I woke at exactly 3:03 a.m. to the sound of knocking. Not my door, not the building, somewhere inside my own walls. Soft, slow, deliberate. I sat up, heart hammering, straining to listen. Then a whisper, familiar, low, sibilant, unmistakable. You can't hide. I scrambled out of bed, banging on my walls, shouting, but there was no one there. Nothing. Yet the air felt heavy, almost solid, pressing against my skin. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to twist and pulse. I fled the apartment. I didn't pack. I didn't look back. I walked through the empty streets until the first light of dawn, trying to convince myself it was over. Weeks passed. Months. I moved again. And again. Always running. Always searching for distance. But it followed. The whispers became a constant, just beneath the level of hearing, like an itch you can't scratch. In reflections, I sometimes catch a pale blur behind me, too tall, too thin, bending impossibly. My sleep is broken, haunted by dragging sounds and 3 slow knocks that echo in dreams. I've tried to tell people, friends, co-workers, even doctors. They call it paranoia, anxiety, stress. But it isn't. This isn't in my head. Because it doesn't stop. I can feel it now, even as I write this. Something just beyond sight, brushing the edges of rooms, waiting in every shadow, lurking behind every closed door. Every silent neighbor in every building I've ever lived in could be it. It doesn't matter where I go. And I've realized the truth, the cruel certainty I can no longer deny. Silence isn't empty. Silence isn't safe. Silence is waiting, and it's always watching. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear the soft dragging of something across the floor right outside my door. And I know, even without seeing it, the 3 slow knocks will come, because it never leaves.